Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good? Had a good lunch? Yeah, thank you. So, you know who I am. You can call me as Sri, a long name, but you can call me as Sri. Just to bit of an icebreaker after lunch. How many of you have seen the sphere last 2 days? One, two, a few of you. What do you think about the sphere, right? When I looked at it, I was just seeing in YouTube for like last 6 months, and then I didn't know that they spent $2 billion on it, right? And incredible. So when I looked into the sphere, I just thought about, it was very adaptive. It was, very, understanding of what's happening in the ecosystem, and it gave a cool experience as well, right? And I was just reflecting on it yesterday night. What does it mean to data, right? So we used to keep talking as data as a new air, new oil, new water, and we kind of lost what else we'll call about data, right? So I was just reflecting on what does data modernization really mean, right? So this is what most data modernizations are. You have a legacy and you build something on top of it and say I have modernized data. Right? You just move data to a new platform and you think you have modernized it. And after 12 months, 16 months, the business comes to you and says that, but this is, by the way, a place in London, no offense. So it's an opera place that has been built this way. So it's a real place, right? So after 18 months, all of us face a classic question. You move data to cloud, then where is the magic wand, right? Nothing happens. Your cost goes up, consumption goes up, then you have the pressure to cut down cost, right? Again, then you think about, did I do anything wrong with data modernization, right? The thinking is you separate out analytics and data separate, and then you focus on the platform rather than the outcomes. So this is how you typically build a platform. I was just reflecting on the sphere thing I spoke about. So can we think about a bit of the ecosystem, right? And can we build a data platform that's more evolutionary? And rather than look modern, can it feel modern, right? So today what we are going to talk about is how do you really build a true modern data platform and make it successful for analytics and the artificial intelligence and the last 12 months Gen AI. Everybody talks about it, so I have to talk about Gen AI as well. So that's kind of what we are going to talk about today. So let's double click a bit, right? The tenets of data maturity has not changed, right? All of us know about this: augmentation, awareness, availability, adaptability, and authenticity. Now, the tenets has not changed, but in the last 18 months, they need a redefinition, right? For example, if you take availability, our definition of availability is that is my data available 24/7, or am I able to compute in my batch window? That's kind of how we define availability. Now, with the modern shift, the word availability means can the data be available to end users at any point in time, right? So AWS has this AWS marketplace, and you also have a paradigm called data as a service. Can we use this to make data available right now and here? The definition of availability has changed. And augmentation, right? How many of you have worked in AWS augmentation for AI? It's been around for some time, but when you say augmentation, what we mean by that is you just don't build your LLMs, but you have a manual way of validating the LLMs and make it more adaptive as well. So we'll talk on each of these 5 parameters, what has been a very conventional definition of data and what is the shift that is happening, and how do we move with what AWS has to offer, and what is that we have to build on top of it. That's kind of what we are going to get to. So I spoke about availability, right? So generally availability is related to data economics. Is it available? Is it cost effective? And all of that. But I just want to take it to the next level, wherein can we focus on data democracy, and can we focus on data as a service? Now, immediately your mind shifts to data products and data stores and all of that. So when you look into data democracy, AWS has data zone and clean rooms, which help you in making data available, and you can build data products as well. Right? But what's more important from a availability perspective is how do you build data services? It's one thing to say that you build APIs, but building APIs is very, very industry specific. I just want to call out an example. This is for a global CPG company where we were trying to build a data as a service for them. Right? They wanted the data to be available for them at any point in time across multiple lines of the business. So how do we build it? We built an industry-specific API, a CPG API. This CPG company is across multiple locations in multiple countries. They wanted two things. One is pricing, and then the product availability, right? So how do I build an API that will help me to get my product availability and pricing right on time using AWS is what we built. Now, as integrators, we have the responsibility of building industry-specific APIs. So what we worked with AWS collaboratively is to build the industry-specific API for CPG and APIs for insurance and pharma as well. So just want to emphasize on the point that the APIs that you have to build has to be very specific to the point that you are solving. I want to talk about authenticity, right? How many of you know about data drift? Heard about the term? Anyone? Okay. So any guesses? We can make it a very interactive session. If anyone wants to tell what a data drift is without Googling, it's okay. So data drift is you choose data for statistical modeling, and the behavior of data changes over a period of time. That's called data drift. Right? For example, a very simple example, you take student scores for a grade, and then you take the student scores for about 4 years, the statistical trend of the grades might change. So that's called data drift. How does it impact your authenticity of data? You build a model with a specific test data in mind, and the model goes for a toss when you go live. Right? How do you solve the problem of data drift? Now, AWS has data glue, data quality, and data brew. Now, all these are great. These help you in kind of testing and validating data, building data quality. But the most important thing from a data drift perspective is that how do you build data for AI, and how do you solve the problem for data drift? The most important thing that you want to build is synthetic data. Right? I think some of you know what synthetic data is. Right? Synthetic data is creating sort of a test data for that specific industry. So again, this is something that we have to build. So if you take, for example, a pharma company, they had data from 50 sources. And they were trying to create, in the R&D division, a drug formulation which can detect cancer at the early stage. Right? Now, the 50 sources of data were changing so fast over a period of time that they were not able to come up with the right formulation for the drug. So there's something called biomarkers which are used for finding out what's a cancer-causing molecule. So we are struggling to find what a cancer-causing molecule is. So the way we solved this is creating synthetic data for that specific tumor, for that specific biomarker. It is artificial data, it is not real data, but that was used along with AWS data glue and quality to check for the real validity of the data that we created and tested as well. So what this helped is that for the pharma company was able to get the drug out of the door in the first while they were estimating to take about 24 to 36 months, they were able to fast forward and make it happen in 24 months. So this is kind of an example that I want to talk about. The other thing is responsible data for AI, right? So our traditional think about data quality is how good is our data within the four walls of our legacy systems. So now when you go to data, when you start building your AI models, you have to start thinking about how do you build responsible data for AI as well, right? And one important area of responsible data for AI is AI ethics. How do we ensure that the data is sourced from the right place, it is governed the right way, and it is used the right way as well, and it is validated the right way as well. So what we had done on top of Amazon data quality is we built a framework called Ethica, right? The Ethica framework ensures that the data quality and data ethics is validated for that specific industry, and then we kind of incorporate it as well when we move the data to production, right? So when you think about data for AI, don't think about data quality just in the realms of the systems that you build, but also think about data quality beyond what you have for today, right? And please do look at data drift and create a view of how the data will be 2 years from now, 18 months from now, and 12 months from now, to make sure that your data drift is well validated and you have plans for building the model for the long term, right? And there's a fascinating thing to build a Gen AI model for tomorrow and for the day after. And you build a proof of concept. The proof of concept is successful. You go live and you're successful as well. But after 6 months, your model fails. And that's because your data drift impacts what you build, right? So focus on synthetic data. Look at data quality for generative AI. And the third thing I will look at is look at data ethics. And how do you build a data ethics framework for that specific industry? Each of the industries have its own set of rules and regulations. Data ethics for life sciences is very different from banks, very different for CPG clients. So you have to, when you build using the AWS ecosystem, think about how do you build a data ethic framework for that specific industry. Now, if you go back to what we spoke about in data democratization as well, when you think about data as a service, build the APIs specific to that industry, right? So that is where, as system integrators, we leverage the power of AWS, but you build solutions on top of it that can solve client-specific problems. So I just want to talk about a bit of data awareness as well, right? So when you think about data awareness, our prior thought process of data awareness is about metadata and how can we understand the data and data, right? So we are very tuned to metadata and data stewards in a very traditional sense. Now, when you really move to modern data, right, remember that building that was built on top of a legacy building? When you really move to modern data, think about data awareness in a completely different sense. You have two types of data. One is data in rest, and second is data in motion, right? And you will see a lot of data in motion than data in rest. So when you deal with data in motion, the data governance is completely different from data in rest. So you need to have very specific strategy for how do you address data governance and for data in motion versus data in rest. When I say data in motion, you do live analytics as and when you kind of use your application. That's kind of the data in motion, right? So, so this is the shift that we see from an awareness perspective, right? There is no one silver bullet for solving data governance problem. Data governance problem has been around for decades. It's just getting complicated with more data coming in. When you're building data for analytics and AI and Gen AI, it just gets more complicated. So how do we build data governance for the next generation? I think that's where we should probably look at a more hybrid approach. So what we have done is that we take AWS data catalog, which is a capability that AWS brings in. And how many of you know about Alation and Colibra, used in any of your programs as well? Yeah. So So Colibra helps in building data governance and data quality. So you take a 3-layer approach, right? The first layer is the data platform. You build a data lake with AWS, and on top of it, you have Alation or Colibra, right? Which helps you in having a data governance and data quality. And then on top of it, you build an analytics layer, right? So again, just to recap in terms of the traditional versus modern, true modern data thinking is that in the traditional way, you just look at metadata and then you work towards metadata management. Please do look at data in rest and data in motion as well. And focus on not data governance, but information governance, right? And again, it's a long journey of building a solid data governance process. So you should look at partnering even within the AWS ecosystem. You have to partner with the likes of a strong data governance product like Alation or Colibra to make it happen. A case in point is a large bank which has multiple lines of businesses, right? This bank has to build a data lineage. It's actually a statutory requirement that they build a data lineage within 2021. Now they're already behind by 2 years, and they pay huge penalties, and they're going to pay some more penalty as well for next 2 years. Now their challenge was in building a data lineage, right? So what we did for them is built an infrastructure where they use AWS Glue and then have a Colibra as well, and built an interface that can manually tag any data governance challenges that they have. So you will face this regulatory requirements and a lot of data lineage issues in your programs as well, right? So when you think about modern data governance, think about how do you work across multiple layers. How do you bring multiple partners together to solve a data governance challenge? Yeah. So I just want to bring all these three together, right? When I say all these three, I talk about data availability, authenticity, and awareness, right? The three things that we spoke about so far. Now, this is a large telco client, right? So they had 3 sets of problems. One is they had 4 lines of businesses where the data was not available on time, right? Second is the models that were created, there was no trust because, for example, they want to do a customer churn model, and they got data from multiple sources, and the business was not having any trust in the model that was created. And the third thing is there was no centralized governance in the ways of how the data was dealt. So they moved data on-premise to cloud, and they spent a lot of money. I would say it's a 1.5-year program. They spent about $30 to $35 million in moving the entire data ecosystem to cloud. After 6 months, the consumption went up. The business asked IT a simple question, right? I'm spending more on data and cloud. I'm not getting anything, right? You promised a lot when we move data to cloud. What's the problem, right? So this is a very classic problem all of us face when you move data to cloud. So we broke this into 3 parts from a solution perspective. Number one is the most important thing is creating a centralized data governance zone. I'm not sure if I can spot it here, right? So see, in your data architecture for analytics and AI, see if you have a centralized data governance zone. It's very important. Generally, data governance is at the business unit level. The lines of businesses don't share a data governance framework across multiple lines of businesses due to organizational politics. But unless you have a centralized data governance zone, you can't be successful, right? You have to stop the program. You have to emphasis on building a centralized data governance zone. Now, what we mean by a centralized data governance zone is getting all the data assets together in one place, use a tool like Alation to manage the data, and officially have stewards who can make things happen. It's a very tough decision Now, this program was supposed to be completed in about a year. We took 3.5 years to complete. And I think it's not a failed program. It's a program where you have a lot of learnings. Biggest learning is not creating a centralized, sorry, data, one second, centralized data governance zone. Second is, you don't create data governance zone and then work on APIs. You should do that in parallel, right? There is no need for you to step approach. So what we did is for each of the 4 lines of businesses, we moved from a classic data lake approach to data product, data mesh approach. And then we created AWS Marketplace. And then we created a set of data APIs that each of the lines of businesses can consume. That's the second thing. And third is, have you heard about information factories? Anyone? Heard the term information factory? So once you create a solid data governance, you should be able to create an information factory. Now, what does an information factory do? It has a set of data governance and rules and procedures which will help you to validate data quickly out of the door and make the data available faster for the business. Right? That's a third learning. So if you want to summarize 3 things here, one is create a data governance zone. Number 2 is create an information governance factory. And number 3 is work on a parallel mode when you create an API-based approach. Don't wait for the API approach after the data governance problem is solved. Right? So we are able to reduce the operational cost savings. We're able to get the business the analytics that they wanted much faster as well. But we took, rather than completing this in a year and a half, it took 3 years to make this maturity happen. But that's the journey that we went through, right? But if you don't focus on the fundamentals, you keep trying to add more to the data lake, you're not going to get what you want as well, right? So that's a sort of the 3 things which I want to talk about in terms of how do you make data more mature, right? One is availability, second is authenticity, and third is awareness. Now that we have created a very, what I'll call a matured data ecosystem, how do we use AI that AWS has to offer, right, to make it more intelligent, right? So we'll talk about 2 things, right? One is augmentation. So augmentation has 2 parts. The first one is building intelligent data pipes. Heard about that, intelligent data pipes? It's nothing but building AI-led ETL. If you really want to put a very crude word to it, that's what intelligent data pipes are. So how do you build intelligent data pipes? You can build intelligent data pipes with what AWS has to offer on top of Informatica or on top of any of the ETL tools as well. So you should look at matured metadata that your ETL ecosystem has and build an intelligent data pipe on top of it. The second thing is extreme LLM. How many of you know the word extreme LLM? Anyone? Okay. So what extreme LLM does is you build your large language models fairly quickly, right? You don't take a lot of time to build, and anyone here can build your LLM models once you understand the foundation of it, right? So, so what we did from an extreme LLM perspective in one of the clients is, this is an investment banking client. And you know about investment bankers, there are 2 parts of the investment bank, the bank that does the core business, and there's high net worth individuals as well. When you look into the high net worth individuals, each one of them want to be served very, I would say, uniquely, right? If not, they switch to another client. So we had to build intelligent bots for this each of the investment banking clients. So we did one thing. With an extreme LLM engineering that AWS provides, we kind of built a very custom-based LLM model, LLM bot for these customers. right? Now, there are 3 steps to the extreme LLM process. The first is user formatting. How do you convert any data anybody enters into a AWS AI format, right? That is number 1. Number 2 is, once you do the conversion, how do you build a bot for the specific persona, right? There are different types of people within the high net worth individuals. How do you do it for them? And third is, how do you make it self-learning, right? So what we did with extreme LLM engineering with Amazon Bedrock, you should try Amazon Bedrock if you have not. It has a lot of capabilities that will help you to build extreme LLM engineering, is that we were able to build bots that we were able to customize for each of the HNIs, and we're able to serve them better, right? And we didn't lose a lot of high HNI customers after this. So this is an example of augmentation, right? A great example of augmentation where we build intelligent bots with Amazon Bedrock. I want to talk about adaptability, right? So I see augmentation and adaptability as 2 sides of the same coin, right? And this is the last of the 5 A's. So if it's a bit boring, so we are done almost, right? So, so when you talk about adaptability, there are 2 parts to adaptability, right? One is, can you be more self-learning and autonomous, right? And second is augmented analytics. So all of you would have worked with Click, Tableau, ThoughtSpot, right? A lot of these BA technologies have interactive reporting. You can talk to your report, reports will give you the answer, and they make a big deal about how my reports are very augmented, right? So when you think about a pure next-gen data platform, augmented analytics is not just interactive reporting, right? You had to move from interactive reporting to the next generation, and that's the most important thing you have to think about, right? So when you think about augmented analytics, you should think about what AWS has to offer. AWS has an augmented AI capability. I'm not sure if you have tried this. So a lot of what I have spoken about in the AWS context is there for you to try out if you have the AWS licenses. It's very simple to build. You don't need to spend a lot of time. You can play around either with the chatbot thing that I spoke about or AWS augmented analytics capabilities that is there out there as well. So you can create a personalized augmented analytics with AWS. And again, this is a true next generation thinking that you should have. And so how many of you know about Amazon Neptune? Heard about it? Anyone played on Amazon Neptune? Yeah? Okay. So, I mean, probably some of these words you're hearing for the first time, but there's a lot AWS has to offer within the same ecosystem. So you really want to think about it. So Neptune is more like a graph DB, if you really want to think about, right? So, GraphDB is used for fraud detection, anomaly detection, and credit card transaction as well. But the good thing about a GraphDB is that your model evolves as you move further. So one area of adaptability is when you keep adding new data sources, we can build new models. And Neptune helps for you to build new data models as well. Now, this is a classic use case where when you launch an AI solution for a specific country and you want to keep expanding to other geographies, Amazon Neptune can help you and keep building data models as we move further, right? And for one of the consumer goods clients that we had, we first launched it in North America. They're present in 24 countries. And we want to do fraud detection models, right? We used Amazon Neptune to build GraphDB for the rest of the other countries as well. So that's a great capability that we have. And again, the model building should be ours, but the capability that you have with the AWS is something that you can make use of. So now I kind of wrap up what we spoke in terms of so far. We spoke about the 5 A's, and we spoke about what we really mean by truly next-gen data, right? When you talk about availability, it is not just data availability, it's about consumption of data. We spoke about augmentation, right? So this is kind of I would say, a full-fledged solution that we built for an insurance client, right? Which brings in truly all the principles of modern data management, or the 5 A's that I spoke about, right? So this insurance client had problems in 3 areas, right? Number one is they had problems with claims, right? Claims processing took a lot of time for them, a classic insurance problem. Second is policy servicing. The productivity of policy servicing was taking time. And third is they had challenges in creating new models, right? So these are the 3 problems that this insurance client had. Now, if you look into that entire data architecture, it's fairly mature, right? The reason I say mature is they have a data asset provisioning, and they have a data acquisition, and firm and data catalog as well. So they are fairly mature in their data journey, but where they are not mature is how to use data for data monetization, right? And that is where I think we play a difference in terms of how do we monetize data for them, right? 3 things we did, right? First is for the fraud detection capabilities, we did Amazon AWS augmented AI capabilities. So for each of the users, we asked them to build their own models, made them take their own time in building the data augmentation, and improve the chances of reducing fraud or time taken to process the fraud as well. That I'm more talking about this layer. Oops. More talking about this layer, right? So this layer is pretty mature, right? Because they have invested in a lot of foundational data, so they didn't have challenges with metadata or ontology, or they didn't have challenges with data acquisition. They had challenges with this layer, right? So 2 things we did. One is from a fraud detection perspective, we did augmented LLM, what Amazon AWS has to offer, that helped in reducing the fraud claim resolution by about 15%, as you can see it. Second is policy servicing, right? Policy servicing is you want to open a new policy, and the time taken to open a new policy, say it takes 2 days, 3 days, 6 hours, 8 hours, right? Because of a lot of the underwriting process that goes through and a lot of validation that you have to do. We help reduce the time taken for policy servicing by 5 to 7% in terms of productivity. That's the second thing that we did with the entire AWS ecosystem as well. And third is their ability to service the clients. We are able to increase it by 3% because we are able to respond to clients using a contact center management solution as well. Now, as you see this, right, we started with a very monolithic data structure, a very conventional way of thinking about data. We moved on to how do you mature the data with availability and augmentation and authenticity. And then we moved into how we can mature the analytics as well. So this is probably your pipe dream in terms of how do you build a truly mature data organization, right? And how do you move from where you are to where you want to go? Now, a lot of this is not going to happen easily, right? You do have a lot of tools that AWS has that you can make use of, but integrating it, building the governance, making sure the governance is right, building the APIs, and building the large language models in a very super fast way. Some of the key factors that you have to think about, and if you want to scale it to other use cases, you should think about data drift as well, right? So that's sort of where I am going to wrap this up, right? So look at AWS. They have Zone, Data Zone, Redshift, Clean Room, Bedrock, so many products, right? I think they are great. They are always having competitive products as well. You can work with Snowflake and Databricks. You can work with Alation. You can work with Neo4j and GraphDB, or you can work with the core AWS ecosystem as well. So you choose that. Then, as an integrator, you have the responsibility of making the transformation happen, right? It can be in the way you, choose the method, model, or machinery to make the transformation, or how do you do the data migration and data governance as well, right? So when you think about modern data, please think about these 5, I would say, parameters or tenets that has evolved, and how these tenets make an impact in terms of how do you really do modern data for analytics and AI. Maybe I ran a bit fast, but I just thought that I'll give a quick glimpse of, there are a lot of, I would say, tools and technologies I covered and use cases as well. But this is just for you to reflect upon where you are in your data journey. Do you honestly want to think that you have a data modernization strategy? Do you really want to go back and say that, let me take a step back and do the right data modernization strategy and make it happen? Right? That's kind of the intent. So I think I'm done. We have about 20 minutes to go. If you have any couple of questions, I can take.